Do you ever have those moments where the whole time you just think, is this actually a good idea? Well, this project started with this stroke of genius and left me wondering just what kind of idiot I am.
Hello, and welcome to this exciting episode of Range Woodworking, where today I get to get rid of all of this mess and replace it with a brand new Mitre station. It's the first project in the brand new workshop and I'm really excited, so let's get started.
So once I had taken a moment on the ground to consider all of my life choices up to this point, I started unloading my sheets. And I managed to do so without any injury this time. Now, despite having a bunch more space in this new workshop, I still like to break down sheet goods with a track saw into more manageable sizes. And having a nice cut list like this goes a long way to making sure I can do this in an efficient and organised manner. Because I'm all about efficiency, efficiency, efficiency.
My motto is simple. Efficiency, efficiency, efficiency.
Could probably just say it once.
Are you making fun of my stutter?
Oh.
Contrary to my efficiency vibe earlier, I decided to use some green tape to lay out my planned cuts. Oh, that's embarrassing. I started doing this because it's very easy to get a bunch of chip out along the cut edge with this cheap melamine, and I wanted to minimize that as much as possible. Plus, it helps me visualize it all a little easier, but realistically, I'm going to go through a lot of tape. But I digress. Once they're all in manageable pieces and stacked off to one side, I can look at cutting them down to their final sizes.
Right, so everything's cut into more manageable sizes. The last thing I need to consider before cutting them to their final size is the factory edge. I've labeled the factory edge on these so that I know this corner is square. Factory edges aren't always square, but in this case, I know this corner is square. So I will make sure I reference that off the fence as I'm cutting these to their final size.
Now, because I'm using stable sheet goods, I don't need to abide by the keep everything as big as possible for as long as possible rule. In this case, I want to set the saw once and then cut everything that's going to be that size all at the same time to ensure consistency. I'm going to build my cabinet carcasses on ladder style kicks that just happen to be the same depth as 50% of my drawers. By doing this, I can rip nice long strips that I can cut the face of the kicks, the bracing struts, and the drawer sides, all from those same strips.
Well, that took a lot longer than expected, as everything always does. Now I'm going to chop these up into various different pieces, and to do that I'm going to use the star of the new Mitre station, which is my new Mitre saw. So I'm going to get this set up, cut these down, and see how this goes for its very first time.
So rather predictably, I'll measure and chop these strips down. And spew dust everywhere, apparently. I could attach my dust extractor, but then you wouldn't get to see how much dust the chute catches. And sometimes, if possible, I'll batch the pieces to speed things up a bit, but I'm not going to bore you with 10 minutes of the hours I spent cutting this all down.
All right, after a lot of cutting, a lot of dust and a lot of mess, I've finally got all my parts cut out. I'm going to take some time now to put them together. So I'm going to construct my kicks, the cabinet carcasses, and the drawer boxes, and then I'll put them in place and fit them, and we'll go from there.
Some of the stars of this build were these 3D printed corner pieces to assist with the actual construction of my carcasses. The pieces just slot in and are held nice and flush whilst I put a couple of nails in initially and then screws for the long term. There's going to be a little trend of 3D printing in this video. I'm not going to talk about mine specifically. I bought it with my own money purely because I wanted to be able to print things that make my woodworking easier or speed up my workflow. Whether it's connectors for the dust extractor that you'll see later, or project specific things like these braces, or the punch guide you'll also see later. Now for the kicks, I'll slot the pieces together, nails to hold, mark the middle of the sheet, and then drive some screws into countersunk holes. To build my carcasses, I take my nicely taped and labelled pieces and lay them out so that I can get a bit of an idea of the orientation of the pieces. The clips go on with a bit of extra encouragement, and just like everything else, the pieces are held in place with 15 gauge nails. And to upgrade from the kicks, to make sure those screws bed into the middle of the board, I've printed this super quick, handy little guide for the punch. It's basically just a small corner with a hole exactly 8mm in from the inside corner. Just a handy little thing I made and printed to make life easier. To be clear, you could have just as easily measured and drilled a hole in some aluminium angle or some other scrap lying around, but for me this was quick, easy and perfect for the job, even if I dropped it on the floor more times than I could count. To save on materials, for the tops I've just used these small brace pieces. There will be a bench top going over the top of all of these cabinets, so there's no need to fully enclose them. I don't know why I decided I should put the second brace piece on standing the cabinet up like that. It just looks awkward. Again, to save on material, I'll use brace pieces and a little arm extending hammer there. Okay, nicely done. I'll use brace pieces on the back to keep everything square and to give me something to secure the cabinets to the wall through. And with one of those at the top and the bottom, this cabinet is done. Now, drawers. These are often needlessly complicated, so I'm going to share my foolproof method. I take the drawer slides and the sides of my drawer boxes, butt them against the inside of the cabinet and measure whatever's left. Then I'll just cut the fronts and backs to this length using my shiny new Mitre saw, after marking the length accurately using a knife. I've also made a little stop block setup using the table saw fence, which I'll adjust with my delicate little adjustment tool, the hammer fist. I can use a stop block because all of the drawer fronts and backs should be exactly the same size, because all of the carcasses should be exactly the same size. And evidently I've learned my lessons from before and have decided to actually use the perfectly appropriate shop back for all of these. Alright, let's get these pieces cut. Oh, forgot to unlock the slide mechanism there. And when I need to shave off just a hair, I can bump the fence over a smidge and cut again. And once that's dialed in just right, the piece should sit in the gap snugly, but not tightly, if that makes any sense at all. Like, it should fit without being forced, and slide in the gap, but not be happy about it. Wonderfully informative as ever, Dan. That's the kind of high quality content people keep coming back for. The drawer bottoms are going to sit in a rabbet, so it's time to reacquaint myself with the dado stack. I've set up the stack to cut my rabbet a completely arbitrary amount up and in, and then I'll send a test piece through and dial the width of the dado stack until I get a nice fit like this. So the dado fires up and it's time to make some dust. Now there are 30 drawers for me to assemble, and before I cut my drawer bases, I'm going to assemble all of the drawers 3/4 of the way. And apparently the mere thought of it is making me thirsty. Fortunately, I won't subject you to the hours of suffering, just these 3 screws. Most of the opening minutes of this video involve me cutting down sheet goods by a variety of methods, so I won't go into a ridiculous amount of detail here. I just took the 9mm MDF sheets and ran it through the table saw until I had all 30 bases cut. Then it's just a matter of popping in the last piece, clamping it perfectly in place, and you guessed it, nails and screws. In the theme of keeping drawers simple, I'll start by installing these bits. The rails? Yeah, let's call them the rails. Installing the rails on the drawer boxes, making sure they are flush with the front of the box, and using a combination square to ensure the rail is level on the box. Although it looks like I don't really know what to do with my hands here.
I'm not sure what to do with my hands.
I then use my self-centering drill bit and screw the rails in to secure them. For the other half of the drawer slides, these handy MDF offcuts will keep everything consistent and level. The slides rest upon, it doesn't help that I'm standing in the way of everything. Now, the slides rest on the pieces and flush with the front of the cabinets. I just use one of these hand clamps to hold it in place while I screw it into place before stacking the next row of guides and doing it over and over again.
So I've finally finished all of those drawer slides, and it's time to make these exposed edges look just a little bit nicer. So, some iron-on edge banding, and it's time for things to heat up. I actually don't want any steam.
So this iron-on edge banding is pretty foolproof. And as I worked my way through the literal 60 meters of edge banding, my technique tended to refine itself. For instance, I start here by cutting each piece with a knife, but ended up just tearing it all off later. You just run an iron over it, nice and hot, with no steam until the glue melts. I try not to glue down the corners at this point so that I can trim away a bit of the excess and then use a combination square to completely unnecessarily mitre the joins in the edge banding. Now I can pretty confidently say this didn't really contribute anything, but I ended up doing it for all of the corners anyway. Initially I used a box cutter to remove the excess over the edges, but found my scraper, which was much more effective. Evidently, I don't know what to do with my spare hand again, because this ironing pose I'm striking is unusual.
We're real happy with what was going on.
I also did away with the combination square and just eyeballed the 45 degrees at this point, because as this look reflects, I'm pretty sick of ironing by now. Once ironed and trimmed, all of the edges get a quick swipe from some sandpaper, and that is enough of that.
All right, well, I'm really running out of things to procrastinate with. It's time to get these installed, which means I've got to clear all of this space and then get started. I don't know why I've been procrastinating. I've done this before. It's not particularly scary, but something about it is just, it's been a long journey getting here.
As I move all of this stuff out of the way, it gives me a chance to reflect. That is annoying. Anyway, I'm only just realizing the shoddy shape some of this stuff is in, and I'm actually almost letting myself get excited about all of the new storage I'm gonna have. Now, I know this station is gonna be 3.6 meters long, so I center that on the back wall and then rip out the tool that creates everyone's favorite noise in the world. After that, I can use this actually really helpful trim pulling tool to remove the skirting board, and then I'll clean up my mess and start by installing the kicks. I'll join them together, making sure the fronts of them are aligned, and then use a laser level to make sure they're level. To do this, I'll take my combination square and check how far off the laser the kicks are in a number of places, which requires a lot of kneeling and squinting, both of which I do not enjoy. And once I've found the highest point or the lowest point, let's say the laser is 15 mil above the kicks, I'll then go around and pack underneath each point to bring it up to match. And then, when it's all perfectly level and packed, I take these small offcut pieces and screw them into the kicks for extra support, just in case any of the shims somehow manage to shimmy their way out. Using my favourite stud finder, I work my way along the wall and then transfer those marks down to the kicks, before driving in some good long screws through to the studs. It should be easier from here now. I simply put my first carcass on the kicks, check that it's level again, even though I know it really should be, and then pack the gap between the carcass and the wall, because the wall is all over the place. And that is a wonderful shot of the back of my head and pretty much nothing else helpful. With one carcass in place, it's pretty simple exercise getting the rest in and secured. I just clamp them up to the first one, making sure that the edges are perfectly aligned, and then after pushing down on them, like that's going to show me anything at all, I just join them together and then into the stud again. and then I can get some of the drawer boxes out the way.
So after a lot of struggling, sweating and swearing, the cabinets are all installed and level. I'm really happy with them. Now, before I fill them up with too much junk, I'm going to get started on the bench tops. Now for the bench tops, my plan is to use this leftover laminated bench top. But we have a problem. This bench top is 495-ish mil wide. The bench top I need is 635 mil wide. Fortunately, I have this. It used to be my dining table top, but I'm going to make a new one. So I ripped it into pieces, and I'm going to use this to have a nice contrasting timber stripe through the middle of the bench tops. First things first, I have to remove the finish, glue these too thick, and then quarter that bench top to glue it in the middle.
Now, I know that it's a no-no or whatever to use a planer or thicknesser to remove finish from timber, but I really don't care. It would take me ages to get the finish off this any other way, and as this table was like the second thing I ever made, it's not very flat at all and could actually use the attention from the thicknesser. Once free of finish, I rip the boards down to a little over my required width, just so I don't have to worry too much about perfectly aligning them when I sandwich them together. Now, the glue I have the most of is Type Bond 3, and I wouldn't usually use that on Tasmanian blackwood timber because it has a habit of turning it green for some reason. Fortunately, you'll never see any of these glue joints, so I'm going to use it anyway in this glue up. Just smear a healthy amount of glue around and then clamp the whole thing together for an hour or so. In the meantime, I can turn my attention to the bench top. Then I need to cut into smaller pieces to make big pieces. Woodworking in a nutshell, really. Unfortunately, once I'd made these into more manageable pieces, my quiet little background fear was realised. I bought these bench tops years ago for a home renovation project, and since then it has sat on its side, getting in the way, getting completely ignored, and warping apparently. Now that I have a wonderful use for it, it's developed this wonderful cup, which I'm going to have to get out. Cutting it in half will make that much easier and quicker, and less wasteful than trying to manage the whole thing altogether. And thanks to these adapters, I no longer have to worry about the dust hose coming off the thicknesser and throwing sawdust all over the shop. After a few passes, I have them all flat, so I send the sandwiched blackwood panels through to make sure everything is the same thickness. And once these bench tops all come together, they'll be far too wide for any machinery and patience I have, so I'm just going to use some dominoes to keep all the boards aligned nicely. Which means, after far too long a hiatus, return viewers can witness the fabled hip thrust woodworking again, and new viewers get to enjoy it for the very first time. Now, this glue seam will be visible, so Type Bond Original will be used, alongside this very handy glue spreader from a set I'll link below. A bit more hammer fist action and the panels can be clamped to squeeze out perfection and then set aside to dry. After a couple of hours, I can scrape off the squeeze out and then give it a quick sand for some initial smoothing. Now, I ummed and ahed for a while trying to decide what edge profile I wanted for the bench top. For the top, I've settled on this 1/4 inch roundover and a completely arbitrary bevel on the underside. I'll cut the bevel with a table saw, tilting the blade to apparently about 30 degrees and ripping the bevel off before cutting the bench tops down to their final size with the track saw. Unfortunately, I can't really avoid sanding any longer at this point. I'm not going to go overboard with it, it's for the workshop at the end of the day, so just 120 and 180 grit will do just fine. Now, if you've seen much else of my channel, you'll know that I'm not usually one to use film finishes. But because this has cost enough already, I already have this polyurethane and it should hopefully offer a good amount of protection for the timber being put on and dragged along it. I'm just going to use this satin finish water-based poly. If I can get it open, that is. Although using a designated paint tin opener is a little bit more effective. Before I start, I'll wipe away the dust with mineral terps and then start applying coats with a low nap roller. This lets me recoat every 2 hours or so I'll build up the coats, giving everything a light sand in between with 240 grit. Whilst those coats are curing, I'm going to turn my attention to fixing the bench top to the cabinets. This is a timber bench top, so I should expect seasonal wood movement. Now my plan is to fix the bench tops at the back and use dominoes to cut slots in the front and the sides so that the movement can occur and the tops will still be secured. I'll be using Z-clips at the side, which I'll show you later, and simple screws will be enough for the front. But I won't be securing them yet, life is a lot easier without them for the time being. I plan on keeping my shop vac and air compressor under the saw, and my initial disaster-ridden plan was simply to measure and cut a piece. But this ply really made me work for it. It kept binding against the riving knife, which I know now, but at the time it took me way too long to figure out. I got some help to support the ply as it was going through, but what I actually needed was some shims to hold the kerf open behind the blade. and hey presto. Unfortunately, this was all for nothing, as it didn't fit due to the irregular shape of the base, so I'm going to pivot and use this piece as side panels, which is much easier. I'll just mark the top of these panels and make sure I accommodate the thickness of the drawer faces. Once trimmed to length, I put a very small chamfer on the edge and a quick sand, and I can just fasten the panel in place from the inside, pulling a rather unusual face while I'm at it. Now I figured out that a template will give me the best chance of success with this bottom piece, despite wearing my most safety conscious work boots. So I'll take my CA glue, activator and MDF offcuts from the drawer bases and go around sticking pieces together that will reflect the exact shape of this space. I can then mark around the template and cut it out with the track saw for a perfect fit. All YouTube movie magic aside, I actually couldn't believe how well this worked first time, with no fine tuning required. I apparently had to stand on it to make sure I wasn't going anywhere, and then I could drive more screws in to secure it. The saw itself is going to rest on a similar platform set below the bench top, so that the bench tops will perfectly align with the base of the saw. To do this, I'll measure the distance with a piece of ply to reflect the thickness of the shelf itself. I can then copy this over to the space and mark for the shelf supports before squeezing myself in and driving in some initial holding nails before properly securing the support with my leg up on the panel for support. I've used some more dining table for the lateral supports that I've just pocket holed to the side supports. I had planned to drive through it to find the studs, but forgot. Plus the pocket holes will be pretty well hidden. I do the same with the front, and I think you can see the issue I'm going to have here. Time to limber up. And nailed the dismount. Now the reality is the top template is going to be ever so slightly different to the bottom template. But on the plus side, it's going to be pretty similar. So I just break the old one and glue it back together in the new configuration before, as I'm sure you guessed, using the track saw to cut it to perfect size. I also figured I should support the middle of the panel before putting the weight of the saw and whatever I'm cutting on there. I'd hate for it to bow or anything like that. My handy right angle driver adapter makes it a bit easier to get in close for these around the edge, and then it's time for the big test. Now I know it as the internet challenge where tradies wreck their levels by scooting them along the framing of a freshly constructed deck. So naturally, I might as well do it too. Flying high on that victory, it's full steam ahead. This hole will be for a power board that will supply the vac and air compressor, and for the air line from the compressor to come out. And another uncomfortable position. And this hole will be for the vac hose to collect a small amount of the sawdust from the saw as I'm cutting. And rather unnecessarily, I figured I should chamfer these holes too. Unfortunately, they are too close to actually get the router in, so I have to remove all of those rather fiddly screws to quickly put a chamfer on, and then put it back before moving in. Time for some, hopefully, quick and easy panels to give myself the illusion of progress. I'm going to have my drill press down at the end here, and fortunately cutting panels to suit here is pretty quick business. I put a piece in position and scribe a line, which, as I said, is pretty quick and easy compared to everything else so far. I can then just secure this piece through the braces or whatever melamine is handy. And once I muscle the drill press into position, hopefully for the last time in a long time, I can screw it in place with these super old wafer head screws that I've had in my toolbox for about 10 years or so. The plan was the same for these end panels. Unfortunately, I left a smidge too much skirting board in place, but the Scream Aloud 3000 and an offcut gets that out of the way pretty quickly. Well, with a little help. And with that panel held in place and some draw face material, I can actually scribe the panel. Now for the draw faces, I've cut these panels to match the width that I need. The draw face heights are somewhat arbitrary because they just have to start and finish in this gap between the actual draws. And the forsaken binding is back to haunt me again. And just to get ahead of the comments, I hate muscling it through the saw like this. It's really not a great idea, definitely not the safest, and a ton of burn marks to sand out. But at least life's a little bit easier on the next cut. Or at least it would be if I'd actually cut the panel the right way around. Now before too long, I've cut 3 out of 4 draw faces for each of these sets of draws. And because I'm a glutton for punishment, I'm gonna put another polite chamfer on everything I can get my hands on and work up a good sweat sanding them afterwards.
All right, so I've got 3 of my draw faces cut and sanded and ready to go for all of my draws. I'm gonna install those and then measure and cut my final draw face to suit this last draw.
The method here is really simple. First things first, I remove this draw so that when I get there with the clamps, I have access to fix it in place. I'll then start by making sure the bottom draw is perfectly running along the bottom edge, and I'll make sure there's a consistent reveal up the side here using packers. For the next drawers, I've printed these quick and easy spacers that clip to the existing drawer face, hold the next drawer in place, and give me perfectly even spacing between the drawers. A little tappy tap tap, and the next face is ready to go. To give myself a break from drawer faces, I'm shoehorning in a quick break to put this dummy panel in under the drill press. These little right angle clips should do the job. Now, I couldn't see any obvious way to hold this panel in place with an even reveal that I trusted. So I decided I'd just shoot some 23 gauge pin nails through it. They don't have much holding power, but they will keep it in place whilst I fold myself in to secure the panel properly. And they're so fine, they're practically invisible. Now, because of how I've decided to go about this, the final drawer faces are likely ever so slightly different along the station. So I measure and cut each one to size. Once again, I can't really clamp this in place, so the pin nailer is back, until I can clamp the faces. Another option would be double-sided tape and stuff, but the pin nailer's fine, because I'm shooting these through in a spot that I know will be hidden by the drawer pulls when I install them. And keeping up with the theme, I've printed this little template for the pulls. I measure the center of the bottom drawer and set a laser on that mark. Then I line the center gap of my template up with that laser and punch for my pilot holes. This way I can speed through and punch all of the drawers really quickly without measuring every single one. I drill a small pilot hole because the fasteners that come with the handles are way too short for the thickness of the faces and the drawer boxes. So I can pop a Forstner bit in these pilot holes and remove some of the material behind, and then drill through to fit the shaft of the fastener. And in my experience, these are really easy to cross thread, so despite me using an impact driver here, I do make sure they all start easily with a screwdriver first.
Okay, and we're finally on the home stretch here. I've had a bit of a cleanup because as I get towards the end of a project, everything gets a bit chaotic and messy. But now we've just got three things left to do. I've just got to secure the saw in place, need to secure the bench tops in place, and I'm going to have to do something about a stop block. But first things first, I'll do the saw.
After watching this video for however long by now, I'm sure you're almost as excited as I am to be nearly done. So naturally, I'll segue that into the quick little YouTube standard of begging for your like of the video, a subscription to the channel, or if you're feeling exceptionally generous, sharing this video with a friend, loved one, or someone who hates relentless Australian accents. Any of those things goes a long way towards helping the channel, and realistically, it encourages me to keep on recording and editing these videos. Now that that's out of the way, the saw is centered, making sure it rotates freely and extends and everything without hitting the wall. And once the screws are all in, the safety wiggle here guarantees it's not going anywhere. And now I feel I'm finally at the point where I can commit to securing the bench tops in place. Now, as I said earlier, these are solid timber, so they will be prone to seasonal wood movement. And if you can cast your mind back to 4 hours ago or whenever I showed it, I used dominoes to cut the slots in the carcass to allow for this. These are the Z clips to hold the side down, and a simple screw and washer will hold the fronts, before I back the screws out ever so slightly so that the timber can actually move. Now, for my stop block, I have to project the fence all the way along the bench top. So using an unnecessarily complicated combination of levels, I set up a straight line to run my router along. And as you can see here, I'm going heavy on the unnecessarily complicated when it comes to trying to clamp this down. Now, the YouTube standard for sliding things or stop block functions on sleds and Mitre stations is, or at least was, T-track. However, I'm changing my systems over to this, the micro-jig match fit system. But before I can do that, I have to cut the majority of the waste away with this unremarkable straight bit. And if the screech and chatter of this bit is anything to go by, I probably should have done so in 2 passes. However, once the way is cleared, I can breeze through with a final pass from the match fit bit. The reason I'm shifting to this is simple. It's cost. You buy the bit once, and then you can buy the hardware, or perhaps just 3D print dovetail hardware for pennies and use them on every jig, sled or setup you have. I'll link a bit down below and some of the match fit hardware. And then when all is said and done, the hardware just slides in this groove and the stop block goes on top, and this wing nut will hold it in place, safe as houses.
So there you have it, one finished Mitre station. Now I've got a bunch of cleaning up, sorting out and putting away to do, and then I can get started using it. There's a long list of projects to do, so if you've enjoyed this video, and I hope you have, please consider liking and subscribing. And until next time, take it easy.